Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. Today, we're unpacking something that affects your grocery bill, your rent, and your retirement plan, but isn't always what it seems. What is inflation, really? If you ask most people, they'll say, prices go up. But let's push deeper. Rising prices are just the symptom. The real disease? The steady erosion of your money's value. Historically, inflation meant something very specific. Currency debasement, not just the cost of bread rising, but the value of money itself collapsing. Let's go back to basics. Imagine you worked hard, saved your money, and put it under your mattress. A year later, you pull it out and it buys less. No robbery, no fire, just vanished value. Why? Because inflation, at its core, is a hidden mechanism. Governments and central banks increase the money supply, which dilutes the purchasing power of every dollar, denarius, or Deutschmark in circulation. And here's the kicker. Governments benefit from this process. It's called seigniorage. That's the profit they make from printing money. And debt dilution? It makes old debts easier to repay in devalued dollars. It's like watering down wine, but with national currencies, and the tab is paid by you, the citizen. And here's the genius, if you can call it that, of inflation, it's politically convenient. Unlike a new tax, which sparks protest, or budget cuts, which spark outrage, inflation works silently. It bypasses debate. There's no vote, no headline, just a slow, quiet drain on your financial stability. So the question becomes, if inflation is so useful to those in power, how often has it been used and abused throughout history? Let's find out. Let's take a walk back to ancient Rome, where the decline of an empire didn't start on the battlefield, but in the mint. At first glance, Roman coins looked sturdy, but over time, emperors like Nero and Diocletian began a quiet little trick. They shaved silver content out of the denarius, replacing it with cheaper metals. The coins looked the same, but held less and less value. Sound familiar? This wasn't just bad bookkeeping, it was deliberate. Rome had armies to fund, bread to distribute, spectacles to provide. Rather than raise taxes openly, emperors chose to dilute the money supply. And in doing so, they set off a chain reaction. As coins lost value, prices soared. Trust in the currency eroded. So what did the state do next? They imposed price controls. Diocletian's Edict of Maximum Prices was an early attempt at economic micromanagement, dictating what you could charge for goods and services. But the markets weren't buying it. Literally, trade collapsed. Black markets flourished. People found creative ways to avoid the official system, because the official system no longer made sense. And here's where the rubber meets the Roman road. As inflation accelerated, economic activity deteriorated. Laborers abandoned cities. Trade routes shriveled. Rome, once a thriving commercial hub, began to rely more on coercion than cooperation just to function. It wasn't the barbarian at the gate that collapsed Rome's economy. It was the slow, quiet betrayal of its own currency. Now let's fast forward to medieval Europe, where kings learned a familiar lesson. When you run out of gold, you can always get creative with your coins. During the 100 Years' War, monarchs like the kings of England and France faced a problem. Wars are expensive, and their treasuries were running dry. So what did they do? They clipped, shaved, and reminted coins. In other words, they debased the currency. A silver coin that once held real weight now jingled with a little less substance. But unlike a tax hike, which might spark revolt, this trick didn't require a vote, a parliament, or even an announcement. It was a silent wealth transfer. Every time the new, watered-down coin changed hands, a little bit of purchasing power slipped away from the people and into royal coffers. And the people noticed. Merchants grew suspicious. Prices got weird. Trust evaporated. Some fled town altogether. Others invented workarounds. Early banking systems that allowed trade without relying on unpredictable royal coinage. Isn't that fascinating? A breakdown in trust sparked innovation. Not because kings encouraged it, but because their manipulation forced individuals to find alternatives. So here's the deeper truth. Currency debasement wasn't just an economic event, it was a political shift. The king expanded his power without asking, and the people responded, not with rebellion, but with ingenuity. Revolutionary France, a land of liberty, equality, and hyperinflation. At the height of the revolution, the French government faced a dilemma. It had overthrown the monarchy, seized church lands, and needed a way to fund its grand transformation. So, someone had an idea. Let's back paper money, called assignats, with that confiscated land. At first, it worked. Land-backed fiat gave people confidence. It was innovative, almost visionary. But then, the printing presses started humming a little too often. Soon, assignats were being overprinted to pay for everything: wars, welfare, administration. As the supply exploded, their value imploded. The same paper that once bought a house couldn't buy a loaf of bread. And with that collapse came chaos, mobs in the streets, riots over food, stores refusing to accept government currency. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a social earthquake. And here's the most uncomfortable part. It began with noble intentions. Liberate the people, break the church's grip, redistribute wealth. But those ideals were pursued through a tool that couldn't deliver: coerced, inflationary finance. It raises a haunting question: when governments use money as a weapon of reform, does the end ever justify the means? In revolutionary France, the answer came quickly and violently. Next stop, post-World War I Germany. A broken empire, a new republic, and a nation drowning in debt. The Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations, massive ones. Germany owed billions to the Allies. But with a crippled economy and little gold left, how could they pay? They turned to the printing press. The Reichsbank began flooding the economy with paper marks to meet payment deadlines. More marks meant more inflation. And soon, inflation meant hyperinflation. Imagine waking up in the morning, rushing to buy groceries, because by evening, prices would double. People carried wages in wheelbarrows. Children made kites out of banknotes. And the middle class? They were obliterated. Savings disappeared. Salaries meant nothing. Barter returned, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Now, let's think about the psychological toll. When people lose faith in their money, they start losing faith in everything. In that vacuum, radical ideologies found fertile ground. Extremists promised order, stability, even revenge. Desperation made their pitch sound reasonable. This is where we see the darker side of economic collapse, not just poverty, but polarization. Inflation didn't just wreck wallets, it cracked the foundation of democracy. Now we turn to a more familiar story, one that's still unfolding: the transformation of the American dollar. Once upon a time, the US dollar was backed by gold. It was a promise: your paper could be redeemed for something real, something scarce. But that changed. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was born. 2 decades later, during the Great Depression, FDR made gold ownership by citizens illegal and seized it for the state. Then, in 1971, President Nixon severed the last tie to gold entirely. Just like that, the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed not by metal, but by trust. So what happens when there's no physical limit on how much money can be created? Enter quantitative easing. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve began buying up assets and injecting trillions into the financial system. The goal? Stability and stimulus. The result? An explosion in the Fed's balance sheet and a flood of easy money. But there's a catch. Asset prices soared. Inequality widened. Responsible budgeting became optional. And the long-term consequences? They didn't vanish, they just got postponed. It begs the question, when money is this easy to create, how long before the value becomes just as easy to destroy? So what happens when a single institution, like a central bank, controls the money supply of an entire nation? Well, let's just say, it doesn't stay just about money. Monetary centralization means decisions that affect every household, business, and investment are made by a small group of unelected officials. And while their intentions may be noble, stability, employment, growth, the tools they use come with trade-offs, big ones. When interest rates are manipulated, markets lose their natural signals. Savers get punished, borrowers get rewarded. Sound familiar? When the money printer roars, the value of existing dollars falls. But not all at once, and not for everyone equally. Those closest to the new money, banks, hedge funds, government contractors, they get it first. By the time it trickles down to the average person, prices have already risen. Economists call this the Cantillon effect. And what about trust? When money feels manipulated, people start to question everything. Institutions, markets, even one another. The fabric of society thins out. Conspiracy theories thrive. Civil discourse deteriorates. Why? Because people feel the distortion, even if they can't always explain it. This isn't just about inflation. It's about incentives. Centralized monetary systems quietly reshape behavior, encouraging debt, discouraging savings, and concentrating power in ways that rarely get voted on, but always get felt. Let's zoom out for a moment. We've talked about coins, printing presses, and central banks, but what if inflation isn't just an economic mechanism? What if it's a moral issue? Think about it. Inflation transfers wealth without consent. It reduces your savings, your salary, your purchasing power, not by vote, not by law, but by policy crafted in distant rooms you'll never step foot in. That's not just economics, that's ethics. Imagine a world where your hard work buys less each year, and no one asked your permission. You didn't agree to this invisible tax, but you're paying it anyway. That's the quiet cruelty of inflation. It hides its hand. There's no receipt, no label, just the slow erosion of what you've earned. And while the rich may hedge with assets and equities, the poor, they hold cash. They live paycheck to paycheck. Inflation hits them first, and it hits them hardest. It's not just numbers on a chart. It's a single mom skipping meals, a retiree watching their savings vanish, a small business raising prices just to survive. So maybe the question isn't just what causes inflation, maybe it's what kind of society tolerates it. Because when money loses its integrity, so does the system built on top of it. So, what have we learned? From the Roman denarius to the Weimar mark, from France's assignats to America's fiat dollar, history doesn't whisper about inflation. It shouts. Every time a government gained control over the money supply, the same pattern emerged: spend beyond limits, inflate the currency, and let the people quietly pay the price. And here's the twist. These policies often began with good intentions. Protect the empire, fund the revolution, stimulate growth, avoid collapse. But those intentions, unchecked, opened the door to long-term damage. When money loses meaning, trust unravels. When savings are punished, speculation takes its place. When inflation becomes a tool of power, prosperity becomes unstable. But history doesn't just warn, it illuminates. We see individuals who resisted, merchants who innovated, citizens who turned to alternative systems, banking, barter, even digital currencies in modern times, to reclaim financial autonomy. And here's the key: the more centralized the money, the more fragile the system. But when people are free to choose their stores of value, markets adapt, communities adapt, people build systems based on trust, not on manipulation. So history's lesson is clear: inflation isn't just a technical glitch, it's a consequence of concentrated control. And the more we understand its patterns, the better we can prepare for what comes next. So where does that leave us? If history has shown us the dangers of unchecked inflation and centralized control, then maybe it's time to ask a bold question. What would a more honest system look like? One where money holds its value, where people choose how to store their wealth, where governments can't quietly tax the public through dilution and distortion. It doesn't mean utopia, but it does mean accountability. It means decentralization. It means transparency. And most of all, it means trust earned, not assumed. The solutions won't come from the same institutions that created the problems. They'll come from people like you, curious, informed, and willing to think differently. Because at the end of the day, money is more than currency. It's a social contract, a mirror of our values. And the more honest our money becomes, the more honest our society can be. If you found this eye-opening, don't stop here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What part of history stood out to you the most? Like the video if it challenged your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to Truth Behind History for more content that digs deeper than textbooks ever will. Also, check out my book History They Tried to Erase in the description below. If you love history that's been buried, distorted, or forgotten, you'll want to read it. And if this episode got your gears turning, you're exactly the kind of mind we're here for. See you in the next one.